Hello, this is part 4 of the mix rundown for Console, the 4-track EP. The very last track is what we'll be looking at today is Havana. Havana, as I say, Havana is the last track on the EP, but it was the actually the first track that we went about recording and mixing. In terms of style, I'd say this track is more similar to Take My Side, which was the opening track. Fairly modern production. A lot of heavy processing. Probably, in hindsight, a lot of over-processing, especially to the snare, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, it's worth mentioning at the start, this is, as of yet, this is the only track that's been properly mastered. The other ones have had a kind of bodge job done to kind of get them up to level, a bit of EQ wise, but this is the only track that's actually been considered like a proper master done. So without kind of further ado, let's sort of get into it. Let's have a look into the makeup of the track. Okay, as we can see here, the track count isn't actually too bad compared to some of the other ones. I mean, it's fairly layered, especially in terms of kind of guitars and vocals in the chorus. But aside from that, I mean, there isn't as much going on as there was in a track like Take My Side. Okay, let's go from the bottom. We'll start off as we have the other tracks with the drums. Again, because this is quite a modern, hard-hitting rock song, I decided to go with mixing mainly off the spot mics, so off the shells. So and then mixing in the overheads and the room tones for the cymbals and for the ambience, etc. So if we solo what we've got for the drums so far. As you can hear, it's a fairly modern drum production, reminiscent of tracks like Take My Side. I mean, we can hear it again in the bridge here. Like I said, this is as I said, the tracks were mixed kind of on the fly and recorded on the fly. They weren't like consistently done in one session. So I've definitely learned a lot over the process. One thing, again, this with the first track, one thing I'm not particularly happy with is the amount of hi-hat bleed in the snare mic, and in particular the way I chose to deal with it. I ended up gating, but as you can hear here, there's quite a lot of hi-hat bleed in the gate, and you can hear the hi-hat coming through with the gate. It's not hugely noticeable, but it annoys me. Cool. Yeah, so again, similar to the way I've been mixing my other drums, I've got a standard parallel compression bus. You can tell this is a long time ago. I'm using Pro Tools stock rather than the lovely FabFilter stuff I've recently come into possession of. This is about parallel compression. And then putting it in, obviously, it fills it a lot. Let me just touch on the kind of settings I use for parallel compression. In this one, put the plugin down here. I've got about 20 milliseconds worth of attack to kind of let the snap through as well. But again, quite a short release, so we get a lot of the body still in there as well. Basically an exaggerated version of the compression that I do to the spot mics. So there's more pop, but also a lot of sustain being pushed back out by the compressor due to the short release time. So again, if we bypass the parallel compression. As I said before, I only tend to parallel compress room mics and the shells. I know a lot of people will tell you only parallel compress overheads, but it's completely subjective. To me, I don't really like the kind of pumping you get in the cymbals. I like the cymbals to be kind of fairly natural, and you get the kind of attack and feel from the actual drum heads themselves rather than. So let's hear the rest of those sound in the mix. I've also got the again similar to the Take My Say, I've got the gated snare reverb as well, which is just for the snare top mic and snare bottom mic. Which is adding a lot of top end information, and it's also kind of, again, it's not a kind of space giving reverb per se. It's to kind of more to extend the sustain of the drum rather than to put it physically in a room. So let's have a look, see how these sound out in the mix. Cool. As with any kind of rock song, or heavy song, the relationship between kick and bass in particular is absolutely paramount. Like, if you can't hear one, if one's drowning out the other, then it makes for really quite a messy listening experience. So I've actually got two bass tracks in this mix, one being a kind of distorted crunchy, and one being very low and subby. What this allows me to do is to create a kind of bridge between, use the bass as a sonic bridge between the drums and the guitars. So the crunchy, distorted top end B bass blends in very nicely with the kind of distorted guitars, whereas the subby bass, blends nicely into the distorted bass, and the subby bass blends nicely into the drum kit and the kick. So it kind of bass almost provides a kind of sonic glue for the track, which I think works really well. I think it got a sidechain compression as well. Just the kick. Oh, I don't. I had sidechain. I had the bass track sidechain compressed to the kick. That it appeared. I guess I didn't need it for whatever reason because that's not here anymore. In terms of production-wise, I'd say this is probably the most actually production-heavy track of all four. Some cool things. We did some cool things with the singer's voice, Sam's voice, for example. We were out and about, and someone described the band's sound as Fendery, and I was like, okay, cool. Didn't think too much of it. And then again, as I mentioned previous, his voice sounds good with a lot of kind of harsh EQ, distortion, etc. And we were looking for plugins to make it to kind of crunch his voice up a little bit, and someone jokingly said, "Oh, why don't we just put it through a Fender?" And with reference to this thing, the idea kind of like stuck in my head, and we actually ended up reamping the vocal take through a Fender amp and a kind of crunch channel. Did this by sending out the track at -20 dB from the interface, which is instrument level, into the front of the guitar amp, and then mic'd up the cab, and it sounds really good. I'm really chuffed with it. The sound, like, it's a sound. It gave a kind of sonic quality that I couldn't find through any kind of distortion plugin.
And when the story takes on a different ending, you be stood there in your high heels waiting for that good man to take you, for the high to embrace you. How much does he pay you to break me into?
So what we actually hear in there is the clean vocal take, reamped through a Fender amp with a bit of crunch to it, mic'd up with, I think, just a Shure Beta 57 or something like that. And then, yeah, all spring reverb you hear done through pedals we had on the floor. Did a lot of knob turning during tracking as well. We had the singer kind of down on his hands and knees, twisting pedals and controlling knobs whilst we were actually recording in, which is a really kind of fun hands-on thing to do. And I think it kind of gave a tone and imparted a kind of DIY element that a lot of mixers are kind of lacking nowadays, and the kind of thing you wouldn't really find in a lot of tracks, and that definitely would not have been able to recreate through plugins as well. Gunshot, it's odd. Oh yeah. Yeah, okay, and in terms of other stuff like that, we've got in terms of vocals, we've got quite a lot of layering during the choruses. If we look here, then we've got the amp reamped signal runs throughout, but it's most prominent in the second verse. We've got a kind of double track and then a higher octave and some nice lower octaves as well. If we listen to it.
There's such a haze bending round the room, With stained walls and constant smell of perfume, I'm out of place and your face is a state, but the denim it suits you.
Vocal take wise, we found it very, very difficult to get the right kind of, or in all the tracks in fact, to get the right kind of vibe going with the singer. I mean, these particular vocals were recorded just in a bedroom with on a fly recording rig. The singer in particular found it very hard to get in the right mood. The take sounded a little bit lackluster. We ended up I ended up suggesting a technique completely shamelessly stolen from a band called After the Burial, which are a kind of more heavy metal band, and also the film The King's Speech. The singer, he said he was more comfortable singing when he was playing, so we gave him a guitar to hold, to play along to, so he had something else to focus on whilst he was recording, which improved the takes to no end. We also we found he pushed his voice more and he gave more if we sent his fold back to be uncomfortably loud. So he was almost fighting to be heard. It ended up getting some really kind of raw takes, especially for the kind of chorus layering, which is something that you definitely couldn't do without having listened back to it. As with the other tracks as well, there's an organ which was very, very annoying to mix. As I said, the organs tend to span the whole audible frequency range without really standing out anywhere. So a combination of kind of harsh EQ and distortion allows that to shine through. The mix is fairly static until we get to this middle section where it gets quite heavy.
And your face is a stain, but the denim it suits you.
Cool. As you can see here, we've got this instrument bus, which basically everything that isn't drums or vocals is routed to. So all the guitars, all the keyboards, all the synths. And just to add we found that the transition from the chorus to this instrumental midsection seemed a bit lackluster. Seemed a bit kind of it wasn't hitting hard enough. And so a really kind of subtle automation of this like instrument level helped kind of kick that whole section into overdrive. Really, it's almost like a very small boost that you can.
I'm out of place and your face is a stain, but the denim it suits you.
Very, very subtle, but it really helps kind of raise the track to a new level. So we actually continued it until the very end to kind of help with the kind of audible climax as well. We've got this really neat synth line which was actually improvised, and I'm glad it was. As you can see, it's very, very, very quiet, and then after the guitar solo, to help fill things out, we get the full volume. Also found, due to the kind of very dense nature of the orchestration of the track, a lot of the tom fills weren't packing through enough, and no amount of compression or EQ would do. I'd EQ and compress the toms to sound brilliant or sound good in a fill, and then I'd listen to it on its own, or not on its own rather, in just a lone hit in a song somewhere else, and it would sound just bad. So we ended up just having to do a lot of kind of volume automation and riding as well. A lot of the automation was done through riding the faders during the bounce, rather than using like drawing in automation in Pro Tools, which I think was actually really fun to do. The band were I don't have access to a lot of outboard equipment, so this was a way of kind of a way of letting that happen with the band, especially. We all had kind of a hand on a fader. I used the kind of USB fader bank. We all had a hand on a fader writing stuff, which was actually a really fun experience. I think that's about it for this track. I mean, it's fairly production heavy. I think if I were to go back, if I had to go back and look on it again, I would maybe try and go for a more organic approach to it, and this in a similar way that I did with tracks like Take My Side, and give them something, because especially with the gated snare, I think it's a bit noticeable. Especially now. But I mean, I could have, in hindsight, I could have used a multi-band expander to allow the high end to come through on the hits without necessarily like getting all the cymbal bleed in there, which would have been preferable. But no, I definitely say this is the most. This has been the most hands-on mix in terms of kind of riding the faders and the reamping, vocals to guitar amplifiers, etc. I mean, it was actually a really good fun to mix, and I hope you all enjoy listening to it. Awesome. Well, this is now the end of the console mix rundown sessions. I mean, yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed watching and listening to it. If you have any questions or any, feel free to comment down below. Brilliant. I've been Ben Palmer. This has been Console, and these have been Console Mix Rundowns. Brilliant. I'll see you guys soon.